So, the last few weeks, I've been chatting about sleep, and I did a four-part mini series using a framework reflecting on the seasons and how it can help us to not just get a better night's rest, but and sleep, but also bring in the concept of rest into our daily lives. Because sleep really is the grand surrender, it's the biggest rest of all. And the lack of sleep and deprivation that we feel and experience, well, I certainly do, is definitely a consequence, I think, of our resistance towards the idea of rest. You know, our society, our life generally awards busyness and productivity and having things to do. And if we think of the context of COVID, there's been this duality of being able to manage, I guess, this hyper arousal of the stress response, of not knowing what's happening, the uncertainty that can drive wanting to be overproductive. I know myself, if I think back on my family patterns and inherited personality traits, there's this work ethic around if you're not busy, what are you doing? Are you potentially being lazy? And the idea of being still was not as rewarded as just staying busy, whether it's something that has to be done today or not, or urgent or not. And then what can also happen because of the stress response is we can go into hypo-arousal, where we can have complete apathy and just do the opposite of being busy. And often that is driven from a place of very low energy. So that brings me to the context of what I'd like to chat about based on what people are sharing with me of what I'm personally experiencing is the topic of energy. Because energy management really should be the new stress management, and energy as a resource we know is renewable. And I'll talk through different dimensions of energy in a moment and some crafty ideas that work for me and may work for you. I'd love to know if there are other things that you're putting into place that are helping you to renew your energy. Because unlike time, energy is renewable. Time, however, is finite. Although even that is up for debate, right? Because when we go into meditation type states, or for instance, when we sleep and dream, time there feels a bit more timeless. It isn't quite linear. But in the sense of right now in the UK, it's 7 minutes past 8. And so we know that, it's going to be 8 past 8 and 9 past 8 and 10 past 8. And there's linear time. There's another 24 hours to this day. And that's all we really have. So each second that passes is one that we can't just renew. So balancing how we feel energetically between these hypos lows and these hypos highs can be quite a balancing act. I guess a bit like balancing a fine wine or champagne, or perhaps because it's the morning I should speak about coffee. And that's something I want to chat about, is how when our energy is low, we tend to look for energy from external sources. So perhaps from stimulants and coffee, and how those can be a false sense of energy, they give us a burst, but they also take from us. So I'll chat about that another time. What I'd like to chat about now is kind of vulnerable, but I guess I've been listening to Brene Brown, and it came up for me in a meditation last night and this morning again. I think this is the first time that I'm sharing this story. And what a place to share it. Wow, Facebook Live. And we all have stories, right? And the stories of our past we carry through today. And we show up in a way today as a result of our belief systems and values and stories. And so part of my family story, and I've shared a bit around the work ethic that I've got from my parents. So if we look at my mom, Pierrette. So Pierrette is the French word, or the French name, the feminine version of Pierre. And my mother's father, my grandfather, was called Pierre. And Pierre was a very hardworking man. Very hardworking, quite stern, apparently high integrity. And he fell in love and met a beautiful lady, my mom's mom, Jeanne. Jeanne is my middle name. That's a bit of a French tradition, that parents will give their children, the daughter, the names of her grandmothers. So I'm Céline Jeanne Liliane, and my brother is Fabrice Pierre Germain. So Pierre, my grandfather, back to him. Hard-working man who worked for the SNCF, the Société Nationale de Chemin de Fer, the national railway in France. And when my mom was 4 years old and her father, Pierre, was in his late 30s. I think it was 1952, this month, July. He worked a full shift through the night, came back home, and then discovered that there was somebody else that couldn't get to work. I think it was a family member. And so he said, I'll go, I'll replace you. So he worked a double shift. So you can imagine he must have been feeling tired. It was very physical, manual work, also emotional and mental work involved. And sadly, and possibly due to the fact that he might have been sleep deprived or tired and made a judgment error, he got jammed between two wagons, coaches, and died. And so Pierre left not just my mum, Pierrette, at the age of 4, he left another 6 children. So there were 7 of them, between the ages of 11 years and 3 months. So it's a story that I only found out about 2 or 3 years ago. I never fully understood the context. And it's something that I've thought about recently because of talking about sleep deprivation and the impact of fatigue and working hard and not perhaps taking the time to recover, knowing that we are beings that oscillate. So we should have periods of high productivity and work, but also then come to places of rest. So yes, that means sleeping well at night, and so working a double shift and not having enough sleep can have disastrous consequences for any one of us. But also the prolonged energy drain of the context and the space that we find ourselves in, this global pandemic and everything that comes with it, can be incredibly draining. And so when we speak about energy, if we think about E equals MC squared, the famous formula, and I by no means understand fully the physics behind it, but basically what it says to me is that energy equals matter and matter equals energy. So energy goes places. It's an exchange. Everything is energy, right? Including emotions. Because often when we speak about energy, we speak about how we feel physically. So if I work with the group and I'll ask them to rate their energy levels, often 9 out of 10 people in the room will say, well, my energy is at a 6 out of 10 because I haven't slept well, or I'm physically tired, or I've been working hard. So if I were to ask you to reflect on your physical energy, how would you rate yourself now in this moment? And if you think about your emotional energy, how would you rate yourself now in this moment? And it may be different because you can be physically, like it's early in the morning. So physically, I feel like I have lots of energy. But emotionally, having just shared what is a personal and sad story, my energy on an emotional level feels a bit lower. And then you could also ask yourself mentally or intellectually, how are you feeling energetically? And that question of how am I is very powerful. I mention this a lot in my sessions and workshops, and I'll mention it again. So it's a tool or a technique that I learned when I did my embodied facilitation coaching course with integration training 2 years ago. And the idea of constantly asking ourselves, how am I, gives us awareness, gives us very powerful information. And I generally ask myself, how am I physically, emotionally, and mentally? And then you could ask yourself, how would I like to be? Because without the awareness, you can't really set an intention or make a different choice. So very powerful tool. And how am I? Well, I feel better today than I did last week. Some of you, if you happen to have seen my post last week, Wednesday, here's another first. I had a fuck it moment. It's what I call when I go into a place of disintegration or low stress. When I end up not caring about stuff and like anything can go wrong and I won't give a care. That's when I know I'm in a bad place, that energetically I'm drained, and if I don't pay attention, something's going to break. And I didn't break last week, and I understand where the fatigue came from. So there was a lot of compassion fatigue. I mean, I ran 7 webinars and 2 workshops, so 9 engagements over 4 days. And I was feeling quite emotional because of what's been happening in South Africa, around the world. And I've been creating a new, very excited about this new passion project an online membership that I'm creating. So it's taken a lot of energy. So emotionally, my energy was low. And I got to a point where my laptop decided, my loan laptop, because my actual laptop was being repaired. And so my loan laptop wouldn't work because it had run out of space. How's that for a sign? When the equipment around you stops to work. And then when I finally did, I had the courage and I got into bed and it was 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. And I thought, right, let's just rest and take my two other calls from bed. I couldn't rest. I was so tired, but I was so wired. And then my inner critic was like at the back of my mind, it's like, do you deserve to rest? Who gets into bed at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon? You're the well-being expert. Like, you shouldn't get tired. You shouldn't post about this. You're meant to be off digital media to fully rest. Anyway, lots of trolls going on, and it was such rich inquiry. So I kept on asking myself, how am I? And how would I like to be? And there was a gap. I didn't want to be caught up in the spiral of self-talk and this energy drain. I could feel myself getting pulled down. And isn't that so true? Like, we know what we need often, but common practice isn't always, well, common knowledge isn't always common practice, or common sense. So what I did, despite feeling a bit like a duck, I looked all calm, or swan. Goodness, let's use a swan. Instead of, looking all calm and collected on the surface, underneath I was really feeling quite rattled. So I went and I pulled myself out of the slipstream. I slipped to the side and I went to calmer waters, which for me was my bed. And I also I gave myself permission between Friday afternoon and Monday to really take rest. So it reminds me of Richard Rudd, who has written and shared a beautiful framework called the 3 Ps. Pause, pivot, and merge. Sorry, I turned it into the 3 Ps. Sorry, Richard Rudd. I turned it into pause, pivot, and practice purpose. So we absolutely have to pause. And that's like the moments of asking, how am I? Or a bigger pause could be stopping for lunch, say at midday, or a cup of tea or coffee. Or an even bigger pause could be taking a 2-hour break before you go to bed at night. And then a longer pause is actually sleeping, or perhaps taking a digital Sabbath like I did over the weekend, 24 hours without engaging with my phone and spending time in nature. And it's in those moments where we pause, a bit like something I miss enormously around the context that we find ourselves in is not being able to salsa dance. I love salsa dancing. And when you're dancing with strangers, you kind of need the pauses because you need to create, okay, well, what's going to happen next? So that you can pivot and then, we're going to a left stop or a left turn or a forward back step. And so in dance, I'm constantly reminded that actually without pauses, it would just be one big fat mess. A bit like in music. I've spoken about this before, where music would sound like a big racket if we didn't have pauses in between the notes. So pausing is important, guys. That's basically what I'm saying. It's like pause, no matter how small. It can be a 5-second introspection, or it can be an 8-hour good night's rest, or a weekend break, or a good vacation. They allow you to pivot and then to practice your purpose, to find out who you are. Why are you feeling the way you are? Are you at the energy level that you want to be? How do you intend to feel? What could you shift and change? So could you create more pause moments that you could melt into your day so that you feel less like a crazy duck or swan, and just really practice a bit more grace? And so I was speaking to a wise friend yesterday who shared a story around how she was incredibly exhausted on the weekend. And then I shared my story around how I practiced this digital Sabbath. And so this line I'm about to say was actually hers. So I don't want to, I thought it sounded smart, so I hope I sound as smart as she did. Thank you, Shelley. She said, you know what, Celine? That is, and this is what happens, is when our emotions and our intellect and then our actions and behaviors all come together, is we have physical manifestations of intellectual decisions regarding emotional engagements. So last week, Wednesday, when I collapsed and I had that really bad moment, my red flag, that was a physical manifestation, not a very good one, of an intellectual decision, which was just to push through work and show up and help others and share my knowledge and expertise and ignore my signs of fatigue, regarding an emotional engagement. My emotional state was a bit worn down and depleted. However, on the weekend, when I decided to take a 24-hour break from my phone and spend time in nature, I went and lay under several trees in Hyde Park without an agenda, without anything to do, allowing myself to settle into the rest. That was, I guess, a positive physical manifestation of an intellectual decision from an emotional engagement. So, to wrap up, because I'm all into, understanding this theory is great, but how do we actually put it into practice so that it benefits us? So, how could you be more aware of your physical energy and how it connects with your emotional and mental energy? Could you perhaps ask yourself today, how am I in this moment on those 3 levels? And how would I like to be? So start with the awareness, that's key, and then accepting the awareness in order to create different choices and change. And then you can't ask yourself how you are if you don't create a gap. So could you create more pause moments? And understanding that pause, like when we salsa dance or any form of dance or any form of music, when we pause, we can then pivot and potentially set an intention to redirect and practice purpose. And then sticking with the patterns of P's is, could you be aware of patterns of your behavior? So I shared the patterns in my family. It's obviously deeply ingrained that we're hardworking and there's a strong work ethic. And yes, I want to take the good from that, and I believe I do. But sometimes it catches up with me, and then that physical manifestation based on intellectual decisions from an emotional engagement doesn't serve me or anyone else because I came close to throwing the laptop that wasn't even mine. Not good. So, can you create awareness? Can you create pause moments so that you can pivot and practice your purpose? Think about your patterns that you may have inherited from your family, from your grandparents, because when we honor our past, it becomes so much easier to accept and be aware of our present. There we are back to how am I in this moment, and to shift our future, because that's what it's all about, guys. We can create a better future. We really can have physical manifestations and behaviors that come from our head and our heart aligning, but from a much better place. So I'm going to chat next week. I'd like to speak about the topic of how energy and emotions are linked. So emotions give us energy or they take away. They can drain us or renew us. And I'd like to look at that battery. And there's this emotional landscape grid that we could use as a tool that can help you reflect on a 24-hour period. And in which quadrant do you spend most of your time? And is it serving you? Is it draining your energy? Or is it perhaps giving you more energy? Which is what we certainly need right now when there's so many reasons and things that are draining us. I'd also love to hear from you. Like, is this topic of interest? I mean, I'm interested in energy. I know that Shirley is because we were chatting about it yesterday. I'd love to know what drains you, what energizes you. Is there anything specifically around energy management and owning the title CEO, Chief Energy Officer, that would be of interest to you? And join me again next week. Let me know if this is a good time. I'm experimenting. So somewhere between 8 and 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning to me feels like a good time to grab a cup of, I was going to say coffee because that's my go-to. But when we chat about coffee, perhaps you'll make different choices after that. So grab a drink, a hydrating drink, and chat about some kind of Wednesday well-being wisdom. That is my intention. If you'd like to, follow me on Instagram for the rest of the week. Perhaps we can share energy renewals and energy drains. I'm putting myself on the spot. I should have thought of a hashtag. So if you join me on Instagram, you can find me under Resilient Energy. Resilient Energy. Why don't we use that as the hashtag? So let's see how we can boost our energy. And we're not always going to get this right. I certainly don't. So let's learn from each other's not so good choices. And let's see how we can manifest abundant, more lasting energy renewal with regular pauses that serve us all. I hope you have a wonderful, wise Wednesday. See you next week.